What if I told you the biggest argument on the internet isn't about politics, money, or culture? It's about time. Every generation looks at the next one and says the same thing. They're getting worse. They're too soft. They're too entitled. They're too distracted. But psychology says something very different. It says, they're not getting worse. They're getting rewired. Because the era you're born into doesn't just decide your age. It quietly programs how your brain sees the world. And once you understand that, generational conflict starts to make sense. So let's break this down. Let's step inside the minds of each generation not to judge them, but to understand them. And by the end of this, you'll never look at a generational debate the same way again. Let's start with the baby boomers. The builders. They grew up in a world rebuilding itself after war. Stability wasn't optional, it was sacred. Systems were expanding. Economies were rising. Institutions felt strong. The message everywhere was clear: work hard, stay loyal, build something that lasts. Psychologically, their brains were wired around one powerful belief: if I work hard, I will earn safety. And for a long time, that belief worked. You could stay at one company for 30 years. You could buy a house on a single income. You could follow the rules and the rules rewarded you. So boomers learned to value loyalty, routine, discipline, respect for authority. Not because they were rigid, but because they were raised in a world where systems actually functioned. But then something changed. Technology accelerated. Industries collapsed. The pace of life exploded. Retirement arrived. Relevance shifted. And suddenly, the identity they had built for decades, provider, worker, builder, started to feel unstable. Underneath the calm exterior, many boomers quietly wrestle with a terrifying question. Who am I if I'm no longer needed the same way? Because when your identity is built on productivity, slowing down can feel like disappearing. That's not stubbornness. That's psychology. Now enter Generation X, the survivors. They were the middle children of history. Too young to fully enjoy the economic stability of the boomers' early adulthood. Too old to grow up comfortably inside the digital revolution. They watched layoffs happen. They saw corporations downsize. Divorce rates climbed. Institutions cracked. And the message they absorbed early was simple: no one is coming to save you. So they became self-reliant, independent, emotionally guarded. Psychologically, Gen X developed adaptability and armor. They learned to handle things alone. They don't easily trust trends, hype, or promises because they've seen too many fall apart. If boomers built the systems, Gen X learned how to survive when those systems failed. They don't advertise their struggles. They don't dramatize their stress. They just deal with it. But that strength comes at a cost. Emotional isolation. Reluctance to ask for help. Carrying weight quietly. They became strong because they had to, not because it was trendy. Then came Millennials, the dreamers. This generation was raised on optimism. You can be anything. Follow your passion. Dream big. They were told the world was open to them. And then right as they entered adulthood, the 2008 financial crisis hit. Jobs disappeared. Debt skyrocketed. Housing became unaffordable. Stability felt like a myth. Psychologists call this expectation trauma. It's what happens when your brain grows up believing the world is fair, and then reality introduces chaos. So many millennials carry a constant internal pressure. I should be further by now. I should be more successful. Why does everyone else seem ahead? That's why burnout became their background noise. That's why imposter syndrome feels so common. That's why comparison culture hit them hard. But here's the twist. They were also the first generation to openly question the idea that success equals money. They began chasing meaning over salary, purpose over prestige, freedom over stability. They don't just want to survive. They want to feel alive. They became the bridge between the old industrial world and the digital one. But bridges aren't stable places to stand. So they search for purpose, for alignment, for something that finally feels like enough. Now we step into Generation Z, the hyperware. This is the first generation that didn't discover the internet. They grew up inside it. Before they had fully developed emotional regulation, they had global awareness, climate change, war, economic instability, social injustice, comparison, perfection, all streaming into their minds daily. Their brains are wired for speed, notifications, scrolling, rapid, information shifts. They can process massive amounts of data quickly, but it comes at a cost, constant mental noise. Psychologically, Gen Z is more aware and more anxious than any generation before. Because when you see everything, you feel everything. And when your brain is still developing while processing the weight of the entire world, Overstimulation becomes normal. They're not too sensitive. They're overloaded. They crave authenticity because they grew up around filters. They crave peace because they grew up in noise. They crave control because everything feels unstable. Digital burnout isn't weakness. It's a nervous system that never gets to power down. And now, Generation Alpha, the unknown. They're growing up with AI assistants, algorithm-driven content, and parents who already documented their childhoods online. Customization is their default. Instant access is normal. Physical boredom is rare. Their challenge won't be information. It will be identity. How do you feel real in a world that is mostly digital? How do you develop patience in an environment optimized for speed? How do you build self-worth when comparison starts before kindergarten? If they're not guided carefully, we could see a generation connected to everything, but disconnected from themselves. But if guided well, they may redefine what it even means to be human. Now here's the pattern. Boomers built. Gen X adapted. Millennials searched for meaning. Gen Z questioned everything. Alpha will redefine reality. Every generation is not a mistake. It's a response. You are not born thinking a certain way. You are wired by what you survive. The wars, the recessions, the technology, the culture, the speed of change. Your brain adapts to the environment it grows up in. That's neuroscience. So the next time you see a generational fight online, pause. It's not about who's better. It's about who was shaped by what world. The disciplined boomer isn't rigid, they were raised in stability. The guarded Gen Zer isn't cold, they were raised in uncertainty. The anxious millennial isn't weak, they were raised in broken promises. The overwhelmed Gen Zer isn't dramatic, they were raised in constant exposure. The distracted alpha won't be lost. They'll be navigating a world we barely understand yet. Different wiring. Different survival strategies. Same human brain trying to adapt. And once you understand that, judgment turns into empathy. Conflict turns into curiosity. Because psychology says something powerful. The time you grow up in doesn't just shape your opinions. It shapes your nervous system. It shapes what feels safe. What feels threatening. What feels meaningful. What feels possible. So maybe the real question isn't, which generation is right? Maybe the better question is, what did their world teach their brain to believe? And once you start asking that, you stop arguing with generations. And you start understanding them. And that shift, that's how progress actually begins.